And it's not impossible that if we have the combination right now of inflation and deflation, I'm not going to use the dialectic to avoid any problems, but at the same time that we have a serious inflation being created, I also have all the seeds for deflation. It's not possible to imagine that the contraction of the credit aggregates will be different than it was right after the crisis. The most important document that everyone needs to see every quarter is the flow funds in the United States. It's very well calculated. It shows all the credit aggregates of the public sector, the private sector, financial sector, banks, families. Or this aggregate dropped, or it was stable. There's a deleveraging process of credit that is finished. If Rokoff, of his book of 800 Years of Financial Crisis, is moderately correct, that is a great work, even though it's not Austrian, documenting this process, we shouldn't think that this dynamic of deleveraging will end next quarter or in the next few quarters. Perhaps we might think that it would be finished over the next 10 years. The accounting measure in Japan isn't quarters, it's not even a decade. It's been decades since Japan has gone through an explosion of aggregates, of the narrow aggregates, and a continual fall in the credit aggregates. Due to additional changes in the economy, as we understand credits, just think about if we have 1,000% of the GDP in financial assets floating around the world. David Roach, not Stephen Roach, who has an independent consulting in Asia, calculated, a very brilliant calculation, that the total amount of assets, financial assets throughout the world, within the bank, within the safe, under the mattress, is about 1,000% of the GDP of the world. If we think that we're talking about 65 trillion GDP of the world, we're talking about 650 trillion that's floating around throughout the world. Compared to the monetary basis of M1, M2, and 3, this distinction at the end of things, the idea of the match, is important, but I don't worry about it. I don't think this match will be lit right now. Another important dynamic that captured this was Rothbard. He understands deflation as a process of purging malinvestment. This purging of malinvestments is behind the rebalancing of the capital structure. If there's a deadly sin in mainstream economics, it's to ignore the capital structure of the economy. And if there's something lethal today, it's with the interest rate of 0% in the United States and Europe and Japan. It simply moves us away from rebalancing. It does not allow the capital structure to be rebalanced. If you can produce at zero, invest at zero, this is a lethal crime. Because on top of all the inefficiencies from the boom, not only will they not be purged from the system, but they'll be increased. Today I'm not seeing any adjustment. I'm not seeing an adjustment in a crucial moment. What was the major central point that created 60% of investment in the United States from 2002 to 2009? Real estate. Real estate sector, it's light years away from a readjustment. You have all kinds of aspects related to the real estate where you just don't see the bottom of the well. You don't see the end of the process. If we saw that the bottom was reached, we'd see a migration to a purging of the system, a cleaning of the system, where we'd see the beginning of a solution. You have to go towards the direction of discovering what the true value of a house is in the U.S., because you have all these other effects of the system that are distorting it. A lot of my private clients, I say it's not time to buy real estate in the U.S. These are assets that are cheap and will get cheaper. This is the dilemma that we face. It's inescapable. I don't think we've reached the bottom, because I think the stimulus hasn't been eliminated. Especially as it relates to the acceleration of growth in the second half of the Greenspan era and the beginning of Billy Bob Bernanke. So, summarizing a bit here, if we don't have this adjustment, this cleaning of this catharsis of the system that will eventually rebalance, a market clearing, I can't buy the idea that we're going to move towards some positive direction. I can't imagine that you can create a control of the match. Why is it that when we land the plane, we're going at 300 miles an hour? Anyone who's understood aeronautics knows that there's a stall rate that's not predictable in these models. We don't know if the stall will be at 300, 200, 180. So the plane won't fall out of the sky. You have to land at a faster rate. This characteristic of the system. And notice here, I'm sorry, but I'm taking this argument into the field of my opponent here. There's no models, there's no techniques to explain. We might even imagine that we could use Carl's theory or bifurcation or some other idea that perhaps eventually can see that these models are efficient. But I'm agreeing with my adversary that both me and my adversary know that this doesn't work. We don't know how the Fed will have a small inflation. They'll have to live with deflation on one side and the possibility of hyperinflation on the other. Japan, that's what the situation Japan is in. The conclusion is that's what we said. Monetary aggregates, pushing forward the economy, the credit aggregates, showing that the real estate in Tokyo is 90% less than it was at the peak of the bubble. And the classic dynamic of pushing the economy forward with credit did not work. It could have worked if the position sold in yens from the Bank of Japan, instead of being 18 quadrillion euros, had been a mole or some scientific number. But this number would not generate just 1% of inflation. The only thing that we can imagine is the most prosaic possible. If you don't know how to do something, just don't do it. Number two, I think it's very clear from the other Fed members, this idea, or the idea that when you're going in reverse, you don't see very well. If you don't see very well, you'll slow down the expansion rate of the Fed. As Mises taught us, you have to accelerate the credit boom. You can't slow it down. I think we have not much time to change this dynamic. I don't think over the next 2 years that inflation will take off. Because I can't see what would happen in an open society like the U.S. where they would opt for some sort of adventure. This is already an adventure. It's the largest expansion, monetary expansion in history. I think doubling or tripling this bet is very unlikely. Within these options, I think deflation is more probable of all these at this time.